CNO's Rapid Innovation Podcast. This is E1 Anderson. Today, we talk to Lieutenant Ben Kohlmann, an FA-18 pilot whose article on disruptive thinking started a revolution. We're going to discuss how the CRIC was founded, 3D printing, and a lot more. Stay tuned. All right, welcome to the CNO's Rapid Innovation Sub-Podcast. This is E1 Jeff Anderson. I have Lieutenant Ben Kohlmann with me today. How are you doing today, Lieutenant Kohlmann?
Doing great. Thanks for having us, ET1.
All right. Thanks for joining us, sir. So you are in charge of, or sort of the guy that helped put the CRIC together, which is the CNO's Rapid Innovation Cell. Can you tell us a little bit about that process and how that came about?
Yeah. So about a year and a half ago, in June of 2012, I had the opportunity to speak at Naval Warfare Development Command's Junior Leader Innovation Symposium, which was convened by Real Craft at the time, who was the commander of NWDC. I had written some things on innovation, and they wanted to disseminate that message. So along with BJ Armstrong and Rob McFall and some other innovation folks from IDEO and the Tang Initiative, which is a pretty interesting submarine-based junior officer innovation initiative, we had a day-long discussion on ways to promote innovation within the military. And that was a great starting point. And about 3 weeks later, Admiral Kraft went to the CNO to brief him on innovation efforts. And during that brief, he discovered that the CNO had recently received a executive panel recommendation that to get innovative ideas, something different had to be done. Different people had to be recruited to push forward ideas. And so this concept of getting junior officers and junior enlisted who were thinking in ways that were different than the standard acquisition system was formulated. And Reverend Kraft came back with that with a mandate to organize a group of individuals that would be kind of disruptive thinkers, if you will, pushing the bounds of what was accepted wisdom within the bureaucracy, and give them some funds and some resources to push forward new technology that they thought would be relevant to the 21st century and the trends that were shaping their world. Jason Chuma, who's a fellow lieutenant of mine at NWDC, was actually the first member of the CRIC, as it came to be known, the CNO Rapid Innovation Cell, and soon after he recruited me to help out. At the time, I was still in San Diego at VMFAT 101, which is the Marine Corps F-18 squadron, and was looking for a job. And since this organization we stood up, I basically requested and was allowed to come work at NWDC. From there, we recruited about 10 or 12 other people, really from informal networks, people that we met and knew were known innovators and creative thinkers, and convened our first official meeting in November of 2012.
Okay, outstanding. Well, it's got to be one of the most exciting things to have happen in the military is to have some admirals say that's kind of a good idea, and then suddenly be thrust into that sort of position. So
absolutely. I mean, that's a great point. And one of the things that you have to realize is innovation and bureaucracy really requires two distinct parts of the bureaucracy to kind of coalesce. The first, which is almost the most important, is the grassroots level. There has to be a groundswell of support and ideas and a desire to make change. But almost more important is the top cover that comes with a senior officer who can foster and mentor those kind of creative, divergent thinkers and get them access to resources and kind of push through some of the hurdles that are sometimes in place. So without a high-level advocate, who's Reverend Kraft was at the time now, Reverend Jerebick is, and obviously the CNO, taking a look at what we're talking about, none of this would have been possible.
Okay. Yeah, outstanding. I know that having just talked to people in general and looking around, paying more attention to innovation in the Navy, there's no shortage of innovative sailors out there. And even historically, the Navy is very innovative in a lot of ways with Admiral Sims and the Monson Lung, for instance. Some of those things were, came from junior officers and eventually really changed Navy doctrine or how we did things. So it's in our blood. We just need to kind of revitalize that attitude, it seems.
Yeah, and I think you raise a great point. Innovation has never not been in the Navy. That's a pretty poor double negative. But we've always had creative people, and especially in combat,
Mm-hmm.
which is true test of, an environment. You look at submarine warfare in World War II, and even aviation in World War II. Those were responses to very real issues that needed to be addressed to save lives. And so there were officers and enlisted personnel who came up with things on the fly to get them integrated, and they were disseminated throughout the fleet to get more effective combat power downrange. But what I think we have at our fingertips now are collaborative tools that weren't available to link disparate parts of the military and the Navy in particular. The siloed communities we tend to have don't talk to each other. But what the CRIC does is we allow a venue and a place for the IDC ensign to talk to an aviation lieutenant, to talk to an enlisted guy on the LCS, to talk to someone else who's working, a civilian who's working in a submarine yard, and exchange ideas of things they've seen in their own civilian lives that could have an application in the military. And it really opens up our eyes to what the rest of the Navy brings to bear. I mean, I know as an aviator, I had very little exposure to the submarine community. But being engaged with guys like Mr. Chris Kona and Lieutenant Schuma and others on the CRIC, I was able to do deep dives into what submarines can bring to the table. And I'm a huge advocate of undersea warfare now. And I understand how aviation fits in that picture better. I understand how the service community fits in the picture better. And I see the Navy as a holistic thing and not just something to promote a specific community of interest that may take more of the budget. We are one team, and we have to understand the other elements of our team to make the best effectiveness.
Yeah, I can see how submarine warfare and air warfare might have some overlap, being they're both in the 3D space and have that sort of thing. One of the things you mentioned about silos is you hear so much in the military about those guys over there, and sort of this. Sometimes there's a healthy competition, but sometimes it crosses over into, well, we don't want to deal with those people because they're the bad guy or whatever. And having these relationships build through the CRIC and other things, it seems like one of the difficulties we've had is how to we have so many platforms with which to communicate via email, personal email, government email, Google groups, Facebook, that we have a hard time deciding on which one to choose because there are just so many different ways of communicating with people throughout the fleet that want to get involved and want to share their ideas, which are plenty. So.
Yeah, well, that's a great point. And I think part of that, what we're seeing is that the market is helping decide. So I know when we first started the CRIC, we had a discussion forum on the NWDC website. Mm-hmm. And it was pretty limited in what was possible just because of the infrastructure that was in place there. So we branched out to email, we branched out to an external site, and none of those really caught hold until we finally got back to the email. And the email, as, I don't know, frustrating as it can be to get like 50 or 60 emails in a day about a particular topic, that's what people respond to. And what we're seeing there is a responsiveness to what the sailors actually will use as opposed to what's thrust upon them. Mm-hmm. And far too often our acquisition cycle is given to us, and you have to make the best of the tools that you have. And, there are very good reasons for why the system is the way it is. But if you open up the aperture just a little bit and let the self-organizing networks that are inherently going to crop up within the different silos decide on a technology and let them kind of exploit it and kind of go in their own path, they will find what works particularly well for their particular culture. And that'll just ease communication. But I also want to touch on something else that you mentioned, talking about other services. One of the cool things about the CRIC is that we've invited Marines and Coast Guard personnel to take part in our ideation sessions. And while they don't get particular sponsorship in terms of the money they could do projects, getting their voice in the room is very valuable to getting the perspective that they have. For instance, one of the Marines who's in the CRIC right now, he was an infantry officer. And many of us in the Navy never spent much time on the ground leading troops in combat. We would obviously do other things to support those efforts and anti-piracy, which is very valuable. But hearing that perspective is very enlightening for us. In addition, having the Coast Guard there, they have a fundamentally different culture and almost a different mission. But a lot of the lessons they learned, obviously they're big ships, they're doing maintenance, they're dealing with a little bit older technology that we have. But some of the fixes they have discovered are easily translatable, and bringing in all people from across the military really helps to break down those barriers where you see the Pentagon and some policymakers kind of go at each other. You know, the Navy needs more money for this, and it will take away from the Air Force, will take away from the Army. Well, come on, guys, we're all one team. I mean, the military exists to defend our country, and if the Navy thinks that they are preeminent over the Air Force and need $50 billion more for this particular area, and they don't understand what the challenges the Air Force faces are, maybe it's better for us to give up X number of dollars to help out our fellow services because they, for whatever reason in this particular time, are more relevant in that area. And it should be a holistic view, not a selfish, oh, this is a Navy-only activity, we want to protect our budget. And I think by opening up the aperture to more people, getting those views in, we're breaking down those institutional barriers that sometimes prevent us from operating as efficiently as we could be.
Yeah, it really seems like a millennial generation response to the problems of our day, you know, with the use of the social collaboration, the social media. And
Yeah.
I see a lot of people under 30 that really seem to have a real, like, sort of, they want to help out and they just want to do good, you know. So it's a good thing. I mean, I hope it gets harnessed well and it remains focused, but it does seem like we're more cooperative than our generation before us for whatever reason.
Well, I don't necessarily think it's our generation versus their generation. I think there's always evolution. I just think the technology right now is at a point that we are able to leverage collaborative tools. And, you know, I guarantee 15 years in the future when you and I are senior enlisted and senior officers in the service, there are going to be technologies that we don't understand that the younger generation will, and they're leveraging. And I think what we're trying to do in the CRIC right now is not so much putting technology into the fleet. And I think, you know, that's one of our main purposes when we do that. But building a culture where a senior commander, whether he's an 06, 07, 08, or an E8, E9, will understand that, okay, in my past, I had people who were mentoring me and were giving me opportunities to put forth new technology. Now that I'm in this leadership position, I'm going to do the same. I'm going to recruit and find the talented 25, 26-year-old to help advise me and give me guidance as to how to best leverage some of these new technologies. And I guarantee Twitter and Facebook will be old hat when we get to be senior leaders, and we have to adapt to whatever that new technology is and allow that younger generation who inherently understands it, not because they're better than us, but just because that's just what they grew up with, let them run with it and find a way to exploit it for military advantage to help defend the country.
Yes, yeah, and it's funny to think, like, how can Twitter, that's something that just sends out, 144 characters, help the military? But there's certainly a ton of uses for Twitter, and I think it seems like our information dominance core understands the importance of social media, and they do seem to be getting out there a lot and doing some cool things with it. So,
yeah, well, here's a very tangible example for the people out there saying, well, how can Twitter have an effect on how we're understanding the environment? I have a friend who's deployed overseas right now. I was just talking this morning, and he mentioned to me that in his MOC, his operating control center, they were not getting information until 2 days after the fact in this particular operation. So, yet, if you look at the Twitter feed of the adversary that they were trying to take down, there was real-time updates as to what was occurring. And so these forward deployed on-the-ground individuals were looking at the enemy's Twitter feed to help them understand what was going on better, just because our institutional bureaucracies weren't able to disseminate the information fast enough and be within that decision cycle. So we were actually gleaning information. Look at the Bin Laden raid, right? I mean, people found out about the Bin Laden raid from a random dude in Pakistan before it was broken on the news, because he was like, what are these helicopters doing? I hear all this noise. What's going down? And all of a sudden, people grabbed a hold of that and realized what was happening. And that changed the narrative. The narrative was no longer controlled by the military PAOs and the communications officers. It was really controlled by outside observers and even the adversary in some instances. So if we're not attuned to that and don't know how to exploit that and utilize that, we're kind of losing it a little bit.
Yeah, I've been in a couple of operation centers where you have like 4 TVs and they've got CNN and Fox News and that stuff going on. But why not set one up with a tweet wall on there or a tweet deck, and then have a couple hashtag searches that you're looking for, or see what's trending, and maybe have some things. And real time you find out, why is this weird thing trending all of a sudden? Why is hashtag Al Qaeda trending, or suddenly you have a picture of what's going on and the news is still behind it. So.
Yeah. And I think we all understand that, Twitter is not going to be the solving of the solution to all of our problems.
Right.
And after the Boston marathon bombing, Twitter was great for breaking news, but it wasn't so great for the aftermath. You get all the social media stuff, but it is one more tool to use and exploit if you can. Again, there's other tools that we're going to use that we have at our disposal that we are using, but it's one thing that we need to understand and harness if we're really going to be truly effective.
Okay. So let's talk about 3D printing a little bit.
Sure. So one of the tenets of the Rapid Innovation Cell is that every member on the team executes a project. And this past year, one of the first projects we did, and again, these projects have some personnel and some people behind them, some staff at NWDC who are contracting specialists, procurement specialists, and we have some funding available to us to kind of do proof of concepts and experiments. But one of the first ones we did was 3D printing. And our first meeting with the CRIC at large back in November 2012, we brought in two technologists from combat, I forget the acronym, but CDSA DAMNEC, which is a developmental center out in Damneck, Virginia. Had been doing some stuff with 3D printing for prototyping and assisting some of our forward deployed warfighters. And they brought it in and kind of just showed it to us and said, what do you guys think we could do with this? And I had personally been following 3D printing for about a year prior from a personal capacity, just in like an investing standpoint, watching 3D systems and Stratasys and some of these other, IPOs emerge that were doing really interesting things in the stock market. And as this technology started to emerge, this kind of piqued my interest. So we ideated over it for about half a day, just kind of saying, hey, how would you use this? What would be the implications in a logistics denied environment? What are some of the capabilities that the technology has right now? What are the limitations? What are some of the challenges that we face legally and accreditation-wise, et cetera? But we elected to pursue it. And there were some other organizations in the Navy doing this. Actually, I think there's probably 20 or 25 separate maintenance entities that are using 3D printing to augment capabilities and really create solutions for obsolete technology, maybe things like the Prowler, EA6B Prowler, where the original manufacturer is no longer in business, but we still need replacement parts. How can we be most effective with the tactiles we have? And they found that 3D rapid prototyping systems was actually pretty effective. Well, we wanted to put this on the waterfront and really let the ground level sailor have this in their hands and come up with solutions on their own. Instead of this being given to them from on high, saying you will utilize this in this direct fashion, we're going to say, well, okay, let's put it out there and see what kind of creativity we can find amongst the junior enlisted and junior officer ranks. So for about 8 months, did a lot of fact finding, got some partners together, actually brought together a group of disparate stakeholders. And about 3 weeks ago, put a 3D printer for the first time on a deployable naval vessel. So the USS Essex out in San Diego right now is experimenting with a Stratasys U-print system. It's pretty low end. It's about $18,000 to $20,000. And this was given to us by DARPA and the Wall Street Medical Center, who had prototyped a medical device use for it. So that was kind of our foot in the door. And the focus of that effort is to see what we could do with printing medical devices and medical instruments that could be used in an HADR environment, so disaster relief, things like that, while also opening it up to the supply and maintenance departments and seeing what they could do with it. And it's early stages right now. The technology is still somewhat immature. We're not going to be printing gas turbine engines on a destroyer anytime soon. But you look at the pace of the technology, and I really believe that 3D printing is at an inflection point, much like the World Wide Web was in 1993, where not a lot of folks were into it, but those that were really experimenting heavy, and the early adopters were making some pretty impressive advances. And I think the analogy there is that a hacker culture emerged with the World Wide Web over a couple of years following that really kind of were toying with this new thing. And I think that if you give it to a sailor right now, and you train them on things like SolidWorks, you train them on the possibility of having a device that can print anything on demand, when it does become technologically viable and cost efficient at the titanium and aluminum and some of the other more robust products, that's going to allow the Navy to have a leg up over our adversaries and even the other services. because we have a culture that understands the possibilities of this technology. And there's going to be a lot of hurdles. One of the things that we've done is bring together NAVSUPs with the supply community, NAVC, which is the acquisition community, and the people that put stuff on ships. And I've talked to them extensively about the material properties and the effect on the supply system and how you aggregate this stuff. And these are all hard questions, and we don't necessarily have answers to them right now. But we're kind of laying them out and saying, okay, this is what we did, this is what we found in the experiment ship, and this is where we see it going forward.
You know, it seems like another huge thing is the cost effectiveness of it, because I think when the Navy writes contracts and stuff, they have to put in like forward parts support for the next 20 or 30 years, which can probably get quite expensive. But just having this option where a lot of things now are going to have part support simply on hand by here's our CAD drawing or whatever, you can then leverage that into, you know, taking the supplier and making the supplier can worry about other things then instead of making obsolete parts for 25 years.
You're absolutely right. And one of the most telling anecdotes I've heard is that a very large shipping company that is very successful is so concerned about 3D printing that in the next 3 or 4 decades, they're looking to see a significant reduction in the amount of interworld trade being shipped by their container ships. And so they're trying to figure out how do we transition from shipping an actual fully constructed widget to shipping raw material back and forth. Because that's really going to be where the market-based advantage is. Once, you know, everybody has a 3D printer in their house and they can create whatever they're missing, it's going to be raw material. And so the fact that a company driven by profit is concerned about their bottom line and is trying to adapt right now, I think is telling us where the technology is going forward. And I think it's imperative that the Navy jumps on it, and they are, to their credit, looking at it very closely. So hopefully, you know, the CRIC tipped the scales a little bit, and some, you know, junior officers with some crazy ideas had a small impact on one small part of the Navy. But it's cool to see that people are paying attention and that it's getting a high level interest.
Absolutely. So if somebody is interested in looking at 3D printing or has some ideas for, maybe they know a tool that they use or something that they could do for a 3D printing, is there somebody they can contact to maybe try to make that happen?
Yeah, so we have a lab set up in Dam Neck. Again, it'll be going to come live here in about a month. And we're looking for those sailor-generated ideas. Now, again, we're working with polymers and plastics, so it's not going to be anything crazy. But if you have a tool or you have a potential product, either email me, email NWDC, email somebody you know on the CRIC, or, you know, use whatever contact us resource we have on the CRIC website. Get a hold of us. We'll put you in touch with a technologist and see what he can do. And we're not going to promise that it's going to be, you know, 100% product. We can at least experiment with it, and you can walk through the process as your idea, you know, comes to really reality.
Yeah, and you know, some of the things that they've been printing with this, I don't know if your labs have been doing this or not, but just if you follow the news and stuff, there are 3D printing magazines for guns. I think they've even printed some guns. There's a company out here in San Diego that's printing cells, and they're looking at printing organs at some point. So there's a lot of excitement about this, and I know on our Disruptive Thinkers page, we've had the most hits is for a 3D bioprinting. So there are a lot of people that want to know about this, and I think you're right. I think there's got a lot of legs moving forward with it. So,
yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much, sir, for talking to us today. It's been a lot of fun.
Cool. Well, thanks for having me, and I hope to hear more in the future. And if you're out there interested in the CRIC, let us know. We should tie it with CRICX, and hopefully you can be part of our community.
Absolutely. Oh, let me point out real quick, too, the CRICX is our extended group of the CRIC. So we do once a year selections for the CNO's Rapid Innovation Cell. But if you want to be involved and still be a part of it, we can't fly you out to places, but you can be involved in local activities. So that's the CRICX. And if you check out our website, like nwdc.navy.mil, there's a CRIC and then a CRICX portion of that, too. So check us out and find your point of contact in your local region, and we'll get you involved in local activities. All right, thank you again, sir. Have a great day.
Thanks, ET1.
All right, thanks for listening today to the CRIC podcast. Remember, the views that we express today are those of our own. They do not necessarily represent Navy policy. Thanks for listening. Get involved with your local CRICX chapter. Check us out on Google. We're also on Facebook at www.facebook.com/NavyCRIC.